Hey guys, the Comics Kid 2099 here, and I'm back to talking about animated superhero television shows. If you're new to the channel, I have tackled other superhero shows like the Legion of Superheroes, Batman Beyond, and Batman the Animated Series. And today I begin my journey to review each episode of Superman the Animated Series, starting with the 3-part episode Last Son of Krypton. Just like with the other shows I've covered, I'll be talking about multi-part episodes in one video like I will be doing today. And there will be spoilers, so if you haven't seen these 3 episodes, see if you can watch them before you finish watching this review. And as always, a quick plot synopsis before I get into my thoughts on what happened. We open on Krypton, where maverick scientist Jor-El tries telling everyone the planet is going to blow up soon. Nobody believes him, not even his wife Lara. Turns out he's right, and the computer network that helps run things, Brainiac, is actually trying to cover up Jor-El's findings so that it can escape from the destruction of the planet. Brainiac does succeed, but all is not lost. Jor-El and Lara's last moments are spent sending their baby son Kal-El to the planet Earth. He's adopted by the Kents in Smallville, Kansas, and is named Clark after his mother's maiden name. When he's in high school, he discovers he has superhuman abilities such as heat vision, X-ray vision, and super speed. As an adult, Clark moves to Metropolis and becomes a journalist at the Daily Planet newspaper. He and his coworker Lois Lane are at a press conference where billionaire business mogul Lex Luthor's innovative mechanical battlesuit is stolen by terrorists from the foreign nation of Kaznia. Clark suspects that Luthor was actually in cahoots with the Kaznians and wanted to use this feigned catastrophe to secure a contract with the US government and secure billions for himself. Superman is able to stop the battlesuit from making its way to Kaznia, thus breaking up Luthor's scheme and cementing the rivalry that will continue for years between these two. Along the way, Clark becomes something of a celebrity to the people of Metropolis when he rescues a civilian airplane and is given the name Superman by Lois and her boss Perry White. Cue credits. There's a lot to like about the opening of this series, and really there's a lot to like about this series as a whole. I couldn't begin to hazard a guess why people don't seem to latch onto this series as much as they do Batman the Animated Series, but I can see several differences between the approach the crew took in working on this series and the way they did things on Batman the Animated Series before. For one, they open with an origin here. In the commentary for this first episode, Bruce Timm said that they just couldn't resist, and really, can you blame him? Yes, we've had something like 8 different interpretations of Superman's origin just in my lifetime, and yes, this one really isn't that different, structurally speaking, from what Superman the Motion Picture did almost 20 years earlier. We start on Krypton, move to Smallville, and then move to Metropolis, then Lex Luthor has an evil scheme and Superman foils it. But the minutia is different, and that's usually pretty significant anytime we see a new version of Superman's origin. He used to be a meat eater, now this new version says he's not. He used to begin his crime-fighting career as an adult, now he started as a kid. His parents used to be dead, now they're not. Oh wait, now they're dead again. And yeah, while I've complained before about just how many versions of Superman's origin we've gotten before, especially in such a short span of time, I think this works for me because of 2 reasons. One, we don't linger on origin material for the entire series. Just a year after this series concluded, Smallville began giving us a 10-year version of Superman's origin story. I've no doubt that the popularity of that series led to the creation of shows like Gotham and Arrow. Yeah, he starts fighting crime in the first episode in Arrow, but it isn't until season 4 that he actually starts being called Green Arrow. That's all origin material as far as I'm concerned. This 3-parter is able to hit all of the highlights and give us the necessary information in an hour. It doesn't linger too long on Clark whining about being adopted or learning he has new abilities. Not only does it give us everything we need, but it's handled with such care that I would rather watch this 3-parter 100 times before going back to Smallville. Okay, that's definitely a low blow, and I'll stop beating up on Smallville, for now. Back to Superman the Animated Series. The other thing that makes me okay with this series giving us another take on his origin is that it introduces us to several villains that we will be seeing down the road. One thing I kinda complained about in Batman the Animated Series was the lack of ongoing arc throughout the entire series. Batman is pursued by the law in the first episode, and never again. We see Robin helping Batman in the second episode, and he doesn't show up again until the 24th episode. It was a great series if you want standalone episodes, but I've always liked having standalone episodes that can be enjoyed by themselves, but when you stack them all on top of each other, they also form a larger arc. A lot like what Justice League Unlimited did about a decade after this series started. Now, while Superman the Animated Series didn't really do much in the way of a series-long arc, it does give the illusion of one in this 3-parter. The big villain of the piece is obviously Lex Luthor, and we'll get more of him in many more episodes down the road, but we also have an introduction of John Corbin as one of the Kazian terrorists. That's less backstory that we'll have to do when we get to the first full-on appearance of Metallo. We also get a mention of the Phantom Zone, which will give us a backdoor origin for the Phantom Zone criminals that we'll get later on in this series, and we also connect Brainiac to Krypton and its destruction. In the commentary, Bruce Timm said he was initially opposed to this because that's not how it is in the comics. I'm sure that was the complaint that a lot of people had when they watched this. I know I've seen people complaining about that in regards to Smallville, but it doesn't actually bother me. I'm one of those weirdos who will complain about something being changed in an adaptation of the source material sometimes, but not all of the time. It really depends on what is being changed and what the change adds to the story. Sure, we could have had Brainiac be an invader from the planet Kolu who destroys Krypton and shrinks and subsequently kidnaps the city of Kandor. That would have been pretty much right out of the comics. But in the interest of efficiency and delivering things as quickly and neatly as possible, they condense Brainiac's origin into the destruction of the planet. But but they retain the basics of Brainiac's character. He's been a robot in the comics before, so it's fine that he's a robot here, and his shtick is still taking all of the information and knowledge from a planet and then moving on to the next one. The only real thing missing here is taking the miniature cities, and the creators behind the series mentioned in a commentary that the higher-ups at DC were pretty serious about Superman being the last son of Krypton. That's why when Supergirl is finally introduced later on, she's from a neighboring planet with similar abilities and isn't Kal-El's actual blood relative. And so this edict from on high prevented the guys doing the show from incorporating the one element from Brainiac's comic book roots that I would say is actually missing. So I don't really mind Brainiac being the Kryptonian version of the internet, as Paul Dini called him in the commentary of this episode, and weirdly enough, Grant Morrison would later incorporate this very idea into his run on Action Comics in the New 52. One thing I was kind of surprised by with this episode is just how much is borrowed from the Post-Crisis on Infinite Earths John Byrne relaunch from the Superman comics from 10 years earlier. It's a very popular version of the character, possibly one of the most popular, so I wouldn't at all be surprised if everyone who worked on this series said that they were big fans of that version. What does surprise me is that generally, Superman gets a soft relaunch of sorts about every 15 years. This was brought up in this quote from the proposal for a relaunch of the Superman books in the late 90s by Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, Tom Peyer, and Mark Miller. Historical records tell us that every 15 years or so, Superman is reimagined to address the wants and needs of a new generation. 15 years ago, John Byrne recreated Superman from the ground up. 15 years prior to that, Julie Schwartz and Denny O'Neil engineered the biggest shakeup since Mort Weisinger began bringing in all his familiar lore 15 years previous. What surprises me is that the series was beginning right at the end of one of those 15-year cycles. With how much oversight DC Comics had, for good or ill, over the cartoons, I would have expected the higher-ups to let the folks working on the cartoon in on some of the secrets about what would be coming down the pipeline with the new Superman status quo that would be coming very soon. I guess maybe it's all in my head just how much is borrowed from the Byrne relaunch. We do get Luthor as a sleazy businessman, which is something that Byrne brought in, but unlike in Byrne, he's a contemporary to Lois and Clark and isn't old enough to be their father. Byrne made it a point that baby Kal-El was not born on Krypton, but hatched out of a birthing matrix machine on Earth. But here we go with the more traditional baby put in a basket and floated downriver like the movie did. One aspect from the Byrne relaunch that does get borrowed here is that Superman isn't advertising that he has a secret identity. Byrne rightly believed that that was a very dumb aspect of the pre-crisis books. Why would Superman be telling people like Lana or Lois that he has a secret identity? It seems like all Lana and Lois did in their respective Superboy and Superman books was try to prove that Clark really was Superman. Here, Lois does ask Superman what he does when he's not saving airplanes, but he doesn't really give her an answer. This improvement Byrne made not only radically altered the dynamic of the love triangle between Clark, Lois, and Superman, but it also freed up Lois's character in general. If she's not chasing Superman's secret identity, then she is free to be her own character, which she is here. She is in danger a couple of times in this episode, but so is an entire airplane full of civilians. Heck, at one point later on in the series, so is Jimmy Olsen. Just because Superman rescues her a couple of times does not make her a damsel in distress, which is something that I really like about this series and the source material that it was borrowing from. I think just about the only major thing from the Byrne relaunch that is missing here is Clark pursuing a romantic relationship with Lois Lane. Maybe it's because the age demographic this show is aiming for wasn't really interested in romance, but I do feel like that's an aspect of the character that is sorely lacking here. The first and only kiss that we get between these two is, spoiler, in the very last episode of this series, if you don't count, spoilers again, alternate realities. The romantic relationship between Lois, Clark, and Superman was the other big reason Byrne got rid of Lois, trying to prove the two were one and the same. He wanted Clark to win Lois as Clark and not as Superman, where he could probably get a date with any woman in the world. I'd have liked to have seen more of that in this series, but I imagine the age demographic not being interested in that sort of thing, and this series not really going for the big long arcs were the two big reasons they didn't want to do that. I've rambled quite a bit about this three-parter, but the very long and short of it is that I like this opening to this series, and I look forward to watching and discussing more episodes. I hope that you guys liked this review and this episode, and if you did, be sure to subscribe because I'll be dropping episode reviews every Saturday, and I'll be doing other kinds of videos throughout the week, so be sure to watch those also. In the meantime, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Keep it real.